नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तम श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्ठिकी। कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय देवकी नंदनाय च नंदगोपकुमाराय गोविंदाय नमो नमः। ओम अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनच्छलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपः कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरोः श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं सागरजातं सहगणा रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनासहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपेश गोपिकाकांत राधाकांत नमोस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वंशकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्ण पृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमती राधानाथ स्वामी इति नामिने। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्ण पृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमती भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारणे मुखम करोति वाचालम पंगुम लंघयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं दीनतारिणं परमानंद माधवम श्री चैतन्य ईश्वरम। हरि ओम तत्सत। हरे कृष्ण। So welcome everyone. Today we will discuss the concluding chapter of the series of chapters of the pastimes of Prithu Maharaj, the Adiraj, the first king. So it has been a very beautiful series of this very extraordinary personality, a Shaktiavesh incarnation, who even though born in a very unusual way from the body of a very sinful king Vena, became a very, very extraordinary personality who set the path for the future of mankind in a very wonderful way in terms of spiritual culture and practices, as well as properly organizing society by forming proper governance, proper models of agriculture, commerce, proper divisions of society, and making sure that a society and civilization is organized in a way that all the different kinds of natures of people have the right facilities to learn and practice and live according to their very nature. This is at the very root of what we know as Varnashram Dharma. While all of us are spiritually equal, in the sense that we are all part and parcel of the Lord, we are Satchidananda, our eternal occupational duty as a soul are all the same. But nonetheless, because each of us are covered by the modes of material nature to different extents, each one is a unique combination of Sattva, Raja, Tamas, and is situated at a particular level of evolution in terms of the contamination and purification. For a progressive life for the Jiva in this world, the Shastras very strongly recommend the following of the Varnashram Dharma, which in a very simple way is nothing but a guiding framework for every conditioned soul based on his particular combination of modes to guide him as to how he should live his life, what should be the duties that he should follow in such a way that he'll be happy and peaceful even as he lives in this world. And with the ultimate aim of Varnashram being execution of duties for the pleasure of Lord Vishnu. Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. Atad Tumbi Dvijashreshta Varnashrama Vibhagashaha Swanushtitasya Dharmasya Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. Varnashrama Vibhagashaha, the divisions of Varna and Ashram. What is that? What is their perfection? What is their Samsiddhi? Haritoshanam. When the duties are performed with a desire to worship the Lord and please the Lord. How do they please the Lord? Because when we perform the duties, understanding that the Varnashram duties are the instructions of Vishnu. And this is explained in the Bhagavad Gita also very beautifully. That yajna comes from the performance of karma, and karma comes from the Vedas. And Vedas come from the breathing of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Which ultimately means all duties which are given according to Varnashram are ultimately coming from the Supreme Lord. They are His guidance, they are His laws. And that is why when we follow them, especially in a selfless way, at least as a matter of duty, if not love, ideally as a matter of love, but at least as a matter of duty, if not love, then one becomes very wonderfully placed on a path where both materially and spiritually one will be progressive. And one will be able to lead a happy, balanced, fulfilling life for himself. So that is the whole idea of Varnashram system. It is not a divisive system. It is a very well thought through system to give an opportunity for every individual, recognizing their individual situation and position, engaging them accordingly so that they are happy. So while Varnashram Dharma as a system, as a philosophy was there, Prithu Maharaj helped in establishing the proper social and governance infrastructure in such a way that all the various divisions of society can live properly. The Vaishyas can do their farming properly. The teachers, so he created suitable, flattened the land so that they could do agriculture, made sure that there are reservoirs of water for irrigation. For the Brahmanas, he made sure there are ashrams and temples. He made sure there were proper facilities for mining, there were schools, there were all other things that the various divisions of society needed. So Prithu Maharaj did something which was unique in the history of mankind. And that is why he's known as Adiraj. And we know how wonderful he was. His qualities were so wonderful, even though he accomplished such extraordinary feats. Such extraordinary feat that he could practically subdue the earth. Of course, the word subdue is not used. He milked the earth. But it wasn't an easy thing. He had to almost subdue her to get her to do his bidding. And all through whatever he did it very selflessly. He was always devoted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, very selfless, ideal behavior, extremely humble, never taking credit for himself. And this is what made him extremely dear to everybody. Dear to the Devatas, dear to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, dear to all his citizens. And this is one very important lesson for all of us to remember, that if we become successful, simply successful, we may become popular. But if we want people to actually love us genuinely, then along with success, we must also be very humble and selfless. Because only a selfless person can be humble, actually. That's the truth. Love is received by those who are genuinely humble and selfless. There are many people in this world who are extraordinarily opulent, very beautiful, very rich, very powerful. People may admire their success, but they don't love them. They envy their position and they may glorify their position, but there's no love for that person. We discussed this in the Wednesday class also, that as soon as the chair changes, all the love for that individual was, because the individual was never the point of attraction. The attraction was always the chair. The chair means the position that that person was occupying. Whether that position was his extraordinary control over wealth or over the power of a state or whatever it is, or the resources, whatever it is. A person becomes truly loved when he is humble. And Prithu Maharaj was not only materially successful from an external perspective, but he was also spiritually extraordinary and extremely humble, and that is why he was dearly loved by all. And one of the pinnacles of his extraordinary pastimes is how he made this very unique sacrifice in the history of mankind, where he was about to do the 100th yajna, but because Indra created such a big ruckus, because he was feeling so threatened that his record of Shatakratu would be violated, that he created so much disturbance that finally Prithu Maharaj was advised, and very humbly he agreed to step back and decided to not perform the 100th sacrifice. That was amazing. It's like in a race, you are ahead and you're just going to get number one. And because somebody says, no, is it okay if you come number two? Can you allow him to come number one? And say, okay, fine. For a higher cause, to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he made that sacrifice. That sacrifice was so pleasing that Lord Vishnu became so pleased with him. He gave him darshan, and we discussed how so affectionate exchange between Prithu Maharaj and Lord Vishnu, and how the Lord granted him all the choicest blessings, which were effectively his request for always remembering the Lord, always getting the opportunity to hear Hari Katha in the association of devotees and never forget him. These are always the blessings which the great souls ask. The great souls do not even define perfection in terms of a place to go to. Sometimes when we think about perfection, we try to think, okay, I have to go to this place, then I'll be perfect. Heaven, Vaikuntha, Goloka. Yes, in a generic sense. So we think, okay, now I am here. I'm in this bad place. I'm suffering in the cycle of samsara. Now I have to go to a place where there is no suffering. And at an external level, yeah, that seems okay and logical. But if we think about it at a deeper level, we will realize that perfect happiness is not about being in a place. Perfect happiness is a state of consciousness, isn't it? One can be in a perfect consciousness in this world also if one is a pure devotee. And one can be miserable if one is in the wrong state of consciousness and is placed in the spiritual world. Once as well as Radhanath Maharaj was telling us that Krishna is being very kind to you, that he is not immediately transferring you to the spiritual world. Why? Because if anybody who has envy goes into the spiritual world, it will be absolute disaster for that person himself. Why absolute disaster? Because in the spiritual world, each and every person will be better than you. At least in this world, we can see some people better, some people equal, some people lower than us. So even when we see people better than us, what we feel, no, we look at some others who are equal or lower than us and we feel satisfied. No, at least I'm better than so many others. Isn't it? But if you are envious, we reach the spiritual world, we are conditioned, because perfection doesn't come just by going to a place. Perfection is a matter of perfecting one's consciousness, which is done through proper purification of sadhana, by purification of consciousness by proper spiritual practices. So if one goes with a contaminated consciousness to the spiritual world, one will continuously burn with envy and become thoroughly frustrated, even though one is in the best abode, because he'll see everybody better than himself. But for a living entity who is actually in pure consciousness, when he sees others better than himself, he becomes happy. He doesn't become sad. Why we are describing all this thing is that we have to realize and understand that ultimately what we are trying to fix is not the place we are going to be in. Ultimately, what, as spiritual sadhakas, as sadhana bhaktas, what is it that we are trying to fix? We are trying to fix our consciousness. We are trying to fix our consciousness in such a way that we can always remain in a state of love, bliss, peace, gratitude, fulfillment in all places at all times. Sthita prajna, fixed consciousness. And for people at different levels of consciousness, naturally, because they like to associate with people of similar level of consciousness, there are different planets for people at different levels of consciousness. And Goloka is for those who are of that topmost consciousness. They are placed there. So that group is happiest there because everybody there is in that state of consciousness, and that state of consciousness is the perfect environment for the Lord and his devotees to interact and experience the greatest bliss. So it's not so much about going somewhere, it is more about transforming our consciousness to the consciousness of what the residents of the spiritual world eternally have. And when we develop that consciousness, automatically by the arrangement of the Lord, we'll be moved to a place where our consciousness fits in very easily. And that is why even in the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna very clearly explains, you attain that state in your next life based on with what state of consciousness you leave your body. And the state in which you will leave your body depends on the state of consciousness you have been living in for the most of your life. As simple as that. So at the end of the day, as spiritual sadhakas, we have to understand that the process of attaining perfection for us is to see how we can perfect our consciousness here and now. And that is why these great souls always ask for this state of consciousness rather than saying, I want to go here. Because once you have that state of consciousness, actually, at a deeper level of understanding, it doesn't matter where you are. Because the most perfect stage of consciousness, one can remain blissful and happy, whether one is in the material world or whether one is in hell. This is not my opinion. This is what the Bhagavatam says. We have not come to that chapter, but in the subsequent cantos, I think it's in the 6th canto itself. In this beautiful pastime of Maharaj Chitraketu, I'm not going to go into the details. A very, very beautiful pastime. We'll discuss a lot when we come there. But just to briefly indicate how Chitraketu Maharaj was in such pure transcendental, pure devotional service consciousness for Lord Hari. And somehow he accidentally committed an unintentional mistake to Lord Shiva. And Parvati Devi, who was sitting next to Lord Shiva, was so offended by Chitraketu Maharaj without understanding his exalted position that she cursed him to become a demon. And that great soul Chitraketu Maharaj became the demon Vritrasur. And there's a very beautiful pastime around that, which we will discuss. But the very interesting thing is, after Parvati Devi cursed Chitraketu Maharaj, she expected that he will be frightened, he'll be besides himself. Oh, I'll become demon, this, that, I am going to go down. But he was totally undisturbed in his consciousness. Even with that situation, he came down and with grateful heart, he fell down at the feet of Mother Parvati and Lord Shiva and said, I'm sorry, I didn't intend to do this, but since Mother Parvati has cursed me, it must be good for me. And Mother Parvati was very shocked because she has never seen this kind of reaction by somebody who is cursed, that he is still grateful and in perfect consciousness. And she feels ashamed that what did I do to a great soul? And Lord Shiva turns to Parvati and as if trying to tell her, do you understand what is the level of consciousness of these great devotees of Lord Hari? And it says a very beautiful verse. He says, Narayana para sarve kutaschana na bibhyati swarga apavarga narkeshu api tulyartha darshinaha. O Devi, O Parvati Devi, those who are fully dedicated to Lord Narayan, those who have attained that perfection of consciousness, Narayana para sarve kutaschana na bibhyati, they are not afraid of being anywhere. It doesn't matter to them. Swarga, whether they are in heaven, Apavarga, whether they have achieved liberation and gone to the spiritual world, Api narkeshu, or even if you push them in the hell because of your curse, Api tulyartha darshinaha, tulya, equal. They see everything equal. Why? Because they see all these as externals. They know that if they maintain a perfect consciousness of absorption in the remembrance of Lord Hari, and as long as that consciousness is not affected, they will always be able to maintain a very beautiful, serene bliss in their own hearts, independent of where they are. And that is what is known as transcendental consciousness. So anyway, this was a side point. I thought it was worth mentioning, and this is very important for us as sadhakas to understand. And that is why this whole process, our process is not like the way sometimes other religions look at it. We are just remain faithful throughout our life and then we'll be transferred to heaven. That's not how it works. The process of spiritual evolution is a process of purification of consciousness. And one attains a state based on the level of purity that the consciousness has achieved. And it is possible to attain perfect consciousness no matter where one is. Yes, in some places it may be more difficult, but the earth is the best place. That is for sure. Scriptures say so. There is no better place than earth to perfect one's consciousness, especially on earth in Kali Yuga. And especially on earth in Kali Yuga after Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has come. So any one of us who thinks that we are not in the best of places, so please reconsider. It is not so. You are already in the best of places. And you are already in the Bhagavatam class. So now you cannot complain anymore. So now the only person you can complain to is ourselves. That I am not doing anything about it. Let us not point fingers outward. Let us point finger inwards. If we are not advancing, who's responsible? Gaur Chandra Das is responsible. He's not giving good Bhagavatam class. Yeah, okay, maybe that may be part of the thing. But ultimately, it is not even about who is giving class. It's about us and how even the most simple statements of the Bhagavatam, even one statement, if we bring into our life, how much it can transform us. Anyway, so that was a side mention, but a very important point for us to mention. And this is what is reflected in the prayers of the great souls. We can see this in the prayers of Prithu Maharaj. We can see this in the prayers of Dhruva. All the great souls. When we started in the first canto also, the way the Vidura is praying, the way Uddhav is praying, the way Bhishma Devi is praying, the way Kunti Devi is praying. None of them are saying, stop all problems for me. They're saying, no, just give me fixed consciousness at your lotus feet. Because, if I ask this one thing, all other things are included within it. That is the beauty. And that is why the devotee's main task is to take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the process of chanting the holy names. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bhajahure mana, Shrinandanandana, Abhaya Charanaravindare. O mind, take shelter of the fearless lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the son of Nanda Maharaj. And we take that shelter by very humbly offering our consciousness into the fire of the chanting of the holy names. So we are discussing today the chapter of Maharaj Prithu's going back to Godhead, because it's the conclusive chapter. So after leading such a very exemplary, extraordinary life, when Prithu Maharaj became old by material considerations, this great soul, who was the maintainer of practically all living entities, after having perfectly followed his duties and guiding his subjects to follow their duties perfectly, he set the perfect example by showing renunciation also. Now, this is something very extraordinary. Many people even achieve extraordinary success, materially or spiritually, but very few succeed to display the example of renunciation at the right time in life. It is not that, Prithu Maharaj decided to retire when, his popularity went down. Oh, now I should retire. Nobody wants me. Or people voted him out of power. He lost the election. Oh, now I will retire. No, not that kind of return. He was at the peak of his success. But understanding that now the time has come, he should now focus exclusively on spiritual life. Of course, for Prithu Maharaj, because he was already in perfect transcendental consciousness, for him it didn't matter. But nonetheless, great souls do this to set the right example. So he handed over his kingdom to his sons. Anybody remembers his eldest son's name? We discussed this a few times. The one who chased Indra. Okay. Anyway, figure out later. Yeah. How many sons he had, Prithu Maharaj? Anybody remembers? Only those who listen very attentively will remember. See, this is the benefit of speaking. Because I am speaking, I remember it without even revising it. It's not that you are doing something different, I am doing something different. When we speak, the consciousness is fully absorbed. The one who hears also can get the same benefit, but their consciousness also has to be that absorbed. I cannot be distracted when I'm speaking. I have to be fully absorbed, otherwise I cannot speak. So I easily remember it without making any extraordinary effort. Anyway, his name was Vijitashwa. And there are 4 other sons, but we'll come to that a little later. And because that topic is covered in the next chapter onwards. But we will focus today on how he achieved perfection. So he handed his kingdom to his sons, and then he went to the forest with his wife. Even though, it was not that the kingdom was all happy. Oh, finally the king retired. No, they were very sad. No, no, they didn't want him to go. They were lamenting. But he said, no, this is the Varnashram system. I have reached whatever age, maybe 50 or so. I don't know, the age is not mentioned, but typically it is said after 50 one should take Vanaprastha. One must go to the forest. So for Kshatriyas, generally they take Vanaprastha. Brahmanas can take Vanaprastha and go up to Sannyas. Kshatriyas generally take Vanaprastha. They generally don't take Sannyas. So he went to the forest with his wife. So Vanaprastha stage, one's wife can be with him. So husband and wife can be together, but they stay together as tapasvis. They do not stay together. They maintain celibacy and follow strict vows for self-purification. They don't live for the purpose of material enjoyment. So to set an ideal example, even though Prithu Maharaj didn't need it because he was already in a perfect state of consciousness, to set the right example, Prithu Maharaj, after going to the forest, the Bhagavatam says he displayed extraordinarily severe practice of penances for purification. So the Shastras say, after one gets out of the material life from a grahastha life where one is so used to fruitive enjoyment, pampering the body, it becomes very difficult to focus the consciousness on the Lord. So proper austerities are recommended. Tapa, dana, yajna, it is said these things purify the person. So this kind of a detachment is needed because purification is about detachment. Detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna. So while positive aspects of devotional service were there, also these aspects of detaching oneself from the bodily concept of life was there. So he started following that very strictly. Most of the times he would just eat roots, some fruits, sometimes some dried leaves, and for some days, sometimes he would only drink water. So he didn't take a cook with him, he didn't take utensils with him into the forest. That's all. Can you imagine from such an opulent life, what kind of a transition this will be? It's not easy at all. For us, every 15 days, Ekadashi comes also, many of us think, oh, Ekadashi, oh, I cannot eat this, I cannot. Even though we are in full comforts of our home. Even though we can practically eat all fruits, we can just go to supermarket and bring them. We don't have to eat dried leaves. Just drink water. The once in 15 days also, some of us may shudder at that thought. So imagine suddenly from such an opulent place coming into. Towards the end of his life, it is said he simply lived. He didn't eat anything, drink anything. He was only breathing air. Like Dhruva Maharaj also towards the end of his austerities before the Lord appeared. And he would practice so much austerity that just to develop detachment from the bodily concept, he would subject his body to extreme weather. It is said in summer, he would surround it with fire. In rainy season, he would stand under torrential rain. And in winter, he would go into cold water bodies and immerse himself up to the neck. Now, Prabhupada didn't recommend all these things for us in Kali Yuga to do. But the point here is that when one subjects one's body voluntarily to discomfort, one develops a detachment from the bodily concept of life. This is the principle. He would sleep on the earth. He strictly controlled his body, his words, his speech, and also his thoughts. And everything he did, including the controlling of his life affairs, he would do pranayam. Everything he did exclusively with the desire to satisfy Lord Krishna. See, ultimately for devotees, even sense control is for pleasing Hari. How is sense control for pleasing Hari? Anybody wants to explain to me how will sense control please Lord Hari? What is the relationship? Anyone wants to try?
Is Rishikesha. Krishna is referred as Rishikesha. He is the controller of the senses.
So you're on the right track. So what is the connection?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes, Sudhir Sundar Prabhu.
I just want to try that. I mean, one way is to control the senses is to engage in devotional service. Like, for example, like what is that? Smelling the flower of the Lord, using your eyes to see the Lord, hearing Hari Katha. Some of the ways for us to control the senses, because because at the end of the day, once we are able to control the senses to serve the Lord, in a way, it will kind of allows us to kind of engage in the service of the Lord.
Yes, correct. Prabhu, you want to say something else? I think Santanam Prabhu wants to add something. Yeah.
Yes, Prabhuji. Here, controlling means diverting our interest to Krishna. Whatever Prabhuji said it is not controlling.
Correct. So both of you are right. So the essential point is, when we talk about control, why are we controlling the senses? It's very simple. That's the question to ask, right? We want to focus our mind, our senses exclusively on serving Krishna. But currently our mind and senses are being distracted by materialistic desires. So ultimately, controlling of the mind and senses means stopping their outward activities towards matter and trying to focus them on the Lord. That's all it matters. That is what it means. That is why it is bhakti. If you are simply controlling, but the desire is not to focus the senses and the mind on the Lord, then it cannot be devotional service. Then it is just tapasya. So anyway, thank you. So that's the correct answer. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam. Using the senses in serving the Lord of the senses. So in this way, following the instructions, if you remember in the previous chapter, the 4 Kumaras instructed him in Adhyatma Yoga, how to practice devotional service perfectly. Following the path that the Kumaras had given, Prithu Maharaj established himself in unflinching devotional service. He performed all the austerity and whatever else from an external perspective was distracting him. He removed all other distractions and became fixed in devotional service. That's a wonderful example. This is also another thing all of us should aim for. Even though we don't need to go to the forest literally and eat dry leaves and fruits and nuts, we can still stay at home and eat home cooked prasad offered to the Lord. But we should look at how we can extricate ourselves from unending materialistic activities, both economic and sensual, by gradually detaching ourselves at the right time in the life and then exclusively focusing on self-purification and elevation of one's consciousness, so that one can ultimately leave the body in full Krishna consciousness. Because remember, we started the class with the discussion that whatever state of consciousness we will attain by the time of death, from there we will continue in the next birth. Or if there is perfect consciousness, then no birth. So we cannot expect, many people, many devotees, new devotees tend to think that some magic is going to happen at the time of death. No magic is going to happen at the time of death. Whatever level you evolve yourself up to, it's like thinking, I'm going to go to sleep today. I am 110 kilos. Tomorrow morning, I'll wake up, I'll be, 75 kilos in weight. Nothing is going to happen. Whatever weight you sleep with, next day morning, when you wake up, you are going to wake up with the same amount of weight. So change of bodies doesn't automatically lead to change in transformation of consciousness. No. To whatever extent we have transformed our consciousness determines what the next body will be. Yes, that is true. So this is very important, Prithu Maharaj. And Prabhupada across the various books emphasizes this point so very much. Then it is explained how Prithu Maharaj, when he fixed himself so wonderfully, then how he engaged in the process of departing from this world. So that whole process of departing from this world is described very beautifully. Now, there are a lot of technical points, but I'm going to skip a lot of technical points, but essentially going to summarize what is explained. So once his mind become purified and perfect detachment and perfect knowledge of the self emerged, with the force of his devotional service, he was gradually able to destroy his Jiva Kosham. See, the soul of the Jiva is covered by the subtle body and the gross body. Usually at death, the gross body is left behind, but the subtle body continues, and that is why one attains another body. For the soul to be liberated and to go back to Godhead, even the subtle body has to be eliminated. And subtle body doesn't go through the process of death. Subtle body has to be dissolved through spiritual practice. Ultimately through pure devotional service. Matured pure devotion also comes up with jnana and vairagya. Those are the concomitant factors of pure devotion. So in that way, he gradually dissolved all his material koshas. It is said he gradually, excuse me, he gradually first dissolved or disintegrated his external body and then the subtler elements, and he went in subtler, he merged all the elements one into another, and in that way he started becoming free from all material designations. Anyadhir. The soul continues to remain in the material world as long as it has any material identification. It's a very beautiful verse where Rupa Goswami says, Sarvopadhi vinirmuktvam tatparatvena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhaktiruchyate. Perfect devotion or pure devotion is to become free from all material designations. Sarvopadhi vinirmuktvam tatparatvena nirmalam. And becoming totally nirmala without any contamination by that way. And attaining a transcendental position. And in that purified state, engage one's purified senses in the service of the Lord of the senses, Rishikesh. That is pure bhakti. So when Prithu Maharaj came to that particular state of consciousness, he became free from all material designations and he became totally purified from all misconceptions, and he could actually see the presence of Paramatma everywhere, within everything and everywhere. Very clearly. He didn't just think about Paramatma conceptually in the mind. He realized and experienced the Paramatma. Atma Gati he achieved. He became totally free from all material desires, not just gross material desires, but even the desires for siddhis. And then in that way, he destroyed his subtle body altogether. This kind of utter elimination of the subtle body, even up to the point of ahankar or false ego, is possible only through pure devotional service, which is best performed when one performs pure Krishna Katha. So in that way, perfectly focusing his mind firmly upon Lord Krishna and being situated in a transcendental platform, having freed himself from all designations and having disassociated his pure consciousness from all material elements, he destroyed his subtle body, amalgamated them. It is said the elements merged of his body, the gross and subtle elements again merged into the universal elements, and some elements he reversed them into pure material energy and then disassociated himself. All that process is described in the Bhagavatam in detail, but I'm not going to go into that. And then A pure devotee sometimes may wait for his time of death to come and then fix his mind on the Lord and go back to Godhead. But some advanced yogis like Prithu Maharaj, who are trained in the Shata Chakra system, when they achieve a Brahma Bhuta stage of perfect transcendental consciousness, they can consciously leave their body. And Prithu Maharaj adopted that process. How did he consciously leave his body? He sat down in a Muktasan, in a yogic position, and gradually, through the process of Shata Chakra Yoga, he raised his prana, the life airs, from his Muladhara Chakra, which is at the bottom of the spine, gradually upward towards the Swadhisthana Chakra at the navel, then to the Manipuraka Chakra in the abdomen, then the Anahata Chakra at the heart, and the Vishuddha Chakra at the throat, and finally brought it to the Ajna Chakra, which is between the eyebrows. He brought the prana up. This process is also described elsewhere in the Bhagavatam. The Gita also hints at this process in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And after having brought the prana vayu here, being perfectly situated in a transcendental consciousness of total disassociation with matter and full absorption in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the yogi is able to force the soul along with the life airs to rupture the top of the skull and leave the body from the top of the skull, and in that way attain the spiritual planets. This process is explained in the Gita, the same process is explained in the Bhagavatam. So the life airs, when it comes out, it merges into the other life airs. Only the pure soul, without the gross and subtle bodies, then goes directly back home, back to Godhead, into the transcendental realm. So by merging all the elements, the earth into the water into the fire, fire into air, air into sky, he merged his mind into the senses, and the senses into sense objects, the sense objects merged into ahankara, ahankara merged into the Mahat Tattva. Then he placed the Mahat Tattva into the Prakriti and then gave up the Prakriti and attained the transcendental realm. So the process of how he disassociates, you can read it in detail in the Bhagavatam, but essentially it is exactly opposite of the process of creation of the material elements. So material elements, as we discussed in the 2nd canto and the 3rd canto, are gradually created from ahankar, from pradhan comes mahatattva, from mahatattva comes ahankar, from ahankar comes so many other elements, and gradually how senses and sense organs comes, then the gross elements finally come. So the process explained here of annihilation is exactly opposite. The elements are reversed and merged into each other. And finally, it comes to pradhan, which is the pure material energy, and then the soul disassociates himself. Now, of course, at our stage, we cannot conceive of what exactly this means, but just technically, all we need to understand is that is the process how the living entity frees himself from material association altogether. So willfully, the jiva can live in this way, and great yogis are able to achieve this feat. Of course, for us in Kali Yuga, yogis like us, bhakti yogis who are not trained in Chakra Yoga may not be able to do all this, but it doesn't matter. We are not so concerned. Prabhupada is very clear, the acharyas are very clear. We don't need to know this process to attain the spiritual world. For us, as long as we are fully absorbed in transcendental consciousness, when the time of death will come, if we are fully absorbed and detached, if our senses are fully engaged in serving Krishna, and our mind is not attracted to anything material, then we will attain the transcendental realm at the time of death, whenever it comes, by the will of the Lord. So in that perfect consciousness, he left his body, Prithu Maharaj, and it is said he attained his Swarupa. He achieved the spiritual world. The Bhagavatam continues. It says, as he went back to the spiritual world, his wife, Archi, who had also taken Vanaprastha along with him, she was next to him and she was watching all this. And she saw her husband so gloriously leave his body. Now, Archi was also very extraordinary. Being a princess, leading such an opulent life, for her to accompany her husband to the forest and also live like that, so simply, her whole body, it couldn't take it. It was too austere for her, but she still continued being nourished by the service of her husband, her body had become frail, she had become very weak, but still she was experiencing spiritual bliss in serving her husband. When she saw that her husband had left his body, she built a funeral pyre, and then the body of her husband, which was in that yogic position, she arranged for that body to be kept on top of the funeral pyre. Even though for some time as a woman she lamented a little bit, she controlled herself. And then after doing all the Vedic rituals for the departed soul, for the husband, and after offering respects to the Devatas, she circumambulated the funeral pyre 3 times, which was lighted. And then, even as her husband's body was burning, she herself willfully entered that fire and allowed the fire to consume her body also. Which means she also gave up her own life willfully because she didn't want to live in separation from her husband. So because of that extraordinary devotion towards her husband, the Bhagavatam says that even the Devatas and the wives of the Devatas become amazed, and they were glorifying Archi's immense devotion to serving Prithu Maharaj. They showered flowers on the funeral pyre and they were playing instruments and they glorified. All glories to Queen Archi, they said. She served her husband with mind, speech, and body exactly as Lakshmi serves Vishnu. And then the Devatas saw that just like Prithu Maharaj had ascended to the spiritual world, Archi's soul also, as she gave up her body, was also proceeding on the same path. Not just going to the heavens, but going beyond the heavens. They started seeing her and pointing to the sky. They said, that must be her, Archi, traveling in the sky. She's following her husband upward. Oh, Archi has excelled in her attainment. Even us who are residents of heavenly planets, even though she's from earth and we are from heaven, we also cannot attain such a destination that Archi achieved because she perfectly followed and served a pure devotee. So we also desire that we can also attain such a supreme destination. So that's the beauty of human form of life. Even on earth, even though it is not as opulent as the heavenly planets, even a small life, Lola Yusho Api, even though on earth there may be a small life, by engaging in Naishkarmyam or pure devotional service, one can actually attain Bhagavat Padam. That is what the Bhagavatam says. That is the great fortune of the residents of earth. Oh, this is so wonderful. This is the glorification by the Devatas. And that is why those who get this opportunity, but even after achieving such a rare human birth with all these facilities by which perfection of life can be achieved, he who wastes it for sense gratification is actually a person who cheats himself. He is actually envious of himself. He is cheating himself. In this way, the Devatas and the wives were glorifying Archi and also explaining the wonderful potential of this rare human form of life. So as they were speaking like this, Archi, the Queen Archi, reached the Vaikuntha planets where Prithu Maharaj also attained. She attained Pati Lokam. And this is what the scriptures again and again mention, that if the wife is chaste and devoted to the husband, she attains the same destination as her husband. If the husband is advanced. Okay, if the wife is very advanced and the husband doesn't attain, that doesn't mean that the wife goes downward. But if the wife is chaste, if the husband achieves a greater destination, even though the wife may not be that advanced, she attains the destination of her husband. And this principle is true even for the disciple when they perfectly serve the spiritual master. they also follow the destination of the spiritual master. They are perfect servants of the spiritual master. So this is Prithu Maharaj's story. It is so wonderful. The Bhagavatam says that his story is wonderful, his character is wonderful, and he is so powerful and amazing. And Maitreya Muni tells Vidura, because Maitreya Muni is narrating this, he says, I have described as far as possible for me, I have described about the wonderful character of Prithu Maharaj. And then to conclude this chapter, Maitreya Muni explains the Falashruti, which means what is the benefit of hearing this pastime of Prithu Maharaj. So please hear carefully the Falashruti. And I hope you have heard carefully all along so that the Falashruti becomes applicable to you. The Bhagavatam says, one who faithfully and attentively reads or hears this pastime. If somebody faithfully reads or hears this pastime, they also attain the same planet where Prithu Maharaj achieved. That is the blessing of the Bhagavad. Not only that, if one is a Brahmana, one also becomes, while in this world, the most learned. A Kshatriya achieves the opulence of becoming a great leader. A Vaishya becomes very wealthy and a master of many other Vaishyas and cows. And a Shudra becomes the best devotee. A childless person becomes blessed with good children. And a poor man becomes the richest. A person with no reputation becomes famous. A foolish person becomes learned. And one attains all auspiciousness and drives away all inauspiciousness. So wealth, fame, long life, Swarga, immunity from the influence of Kali Yuga, and the attainments of the Purusharthas of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, all are attained simply by faithfully hearing or reciting this pastime of Prithu Maharaj. A king attains victory, ruling power, and tribute from subordinate kings. So this pastime is also especially relevant for kings because the example of Prithu Maharaj was that of an ideal king. So it's very important. If you remember earlier, one of the glorifications of Prithu Maharaj is his glories are, almost like hearing the glories of Lord Ramchandra, who's Maryada Purushottam. So very, very extraordinary. And the Bhagavatam and the Maitreya Muni concludes by saying that a pure devotee, when he is discharging his pure devotional service, must hear, read, and induce others to hear about the character and life of Prithu Maharaj. So it's very important because the Bhagavatam doesn't include not essential stories. So imagine so many 6, 7, 8 chapters we have discussed Prithu Maharaj's pastimes. So how important they are. The chapter concludes by saying that hearing and chanting about Prithu Maharaj enriches one's devotional attitude. It increases our faith and attraction to the Lord's lotus feet. And that attraction for the Lord's lotus feet is going to be the boat on which we are going to be seated, which is going to help us to cross the ocean of material existence. Bhava Sindhu Pota Pade. And thus, one can go back home, back to Godhead, just like Prithu Maharaj. Prithu Maharaj ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Samaveta Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. So hopefully all of you have listened carefully so that this blessing is applicable to all of you. So we are sharp 10 and we have completed this whole section of Prithu Maharaj. So I'm opening up the floor. If there are any questions or comments, we can quickly take a few.
Hare Krishna, brother.
Yes.
Prabhu, I just want to clarify one point. Ultimately, as far as the Parnashna Dharma is concerned, ultimately, whatever we do, we have to, serve the Lord. So especially in Kali Yuga, I mean, I think Prabhupada also has kind of mentioned that we are all Sudras and so on. So how do we connect this back to the Partha Ashram system where you got the Brahmana and what is that? The Brahmanas, the Satriya, Vaishya, and Sudras and so on. Because sometimes we are also not sure. I mean, what is our position? Because generally everybody is born as Sudras and so on. So is it like at the end of the day, as long as we are clear, whatever occupation I'm going to take, I'm going to do what is that? Serve the Lord. Is it what I'm saying? Is it the what right decent way, Prabhu? Thank you.
Yeah. So first thing is, yes, in Kali Yuga, to properly follow Varnashram system in the same way that it was originally instituted, is actually very, very difficult, practically impossible. Why? Because that infrastructure and setup itself is not there. Correct? For example, even if a person decides to live as a Brahmana, it is not possible to live by begging. In many countries, begging is illegal. And if he just says, I will do whatever services, I will only live on the donations of others, then he will probably have to fast most of the time. So there are many practical challenges to, in the current situation, to exactly follow that. And that is why in Kali Yuga, the encouragement is to adopt the spirit of Varnashram. And the spirit of Varnashram is to, based on our nature, find the right kind of occupational duties to do and engage in those occupational duties with sincerity, hard work, honesty, selflessness, and dedicate the activities to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that is the principle of Daivi Varnashram system. And still, even with that, there may be so many faults because many of us may not be still able to do things perfectly. But ultimately, if we are focused on pure devotional service and we are absorbed in the sadhana of pure devotional service, following the instructions of a pure devotee and working under the guidance of an advanced soul, then in spite of all these faults, Krishna will pull us out from the ocean of material existence by overlooking our faults and giving us whatever, making up for our shortcomings, so to say. See, the most important thing for us is in our situation is that we should very, very sincerely take to the process of Krishna consciousness, the ABCD, very, very sincerely. Association of devotees, studying Gita, Bhagavatam, chanting the holy names, worshipping the Lord, eating Krishna Prasad. If we take up this process very, very seriously and make that the focus of our life, and whatever occupational duties we have to do, and whatever family related duties we have to do. So we have a profession and we have our family. As long as we manage them, as long as we organize them based on our nature properly, understanding the principles of Varnashram and do it honestly, and try to see how we can integrate our spiritual principles and adopt a life which doesn't oppose the principles of pure devotion, but rather supports it, then one can actually continue to make good progress. It may not be a perfect situation. One may not be able to establish oneself perfectly in that framework of an ideal Varnashram, but in spirit, because it is possible to attain pure devotion even without Varnashram system. Varnashram system supports us when we are in the conditioned stage. Varnashram system is not an essential practice for attaining pure devotion. That is what we have to understand. But it is strongly recommended for conditioned souls so that they can live peacefully, become progressive, and gradually advance towards the goal of life. Our emphasis in Kali Yuga, that's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not emphasize so much on the Varnashram itself. He said, yes, whatever duties you have according to that, you do it honestly, you do it selflessly, you dedicate the results to the Lord. But most important is you organize your life in such a way that it is centered around Harinam, Hari Katha, and Hari Seva and Bhakta Seva, Vaishnav Seva. Right? So that is more important. And also it is true that when we become very positively connected to the Lord in devotional service, when we become very strong in our sadhana, in our Shastra study, Krishna gives us the necessary intelligence to mold our lives properly also in terms of our family, occupation and other things, so that we can actually progress very nicely in our spiritual life. So Krishna gives us the intelligence for the necessary alignment also, which is true and which is also very needed. So we have to make the best of a bad bargain. And the most important thing for us is, that's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave 2-3 most important instructions. What are the most important 3 instructions of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? What are the 3 most important instructions? Anybody? What are the 3 most important instructions of Chaitanya? You are on mute, Santanam Prabhu. You are saying something to us. I see your lips moving, but your mic is, or you're talking to your wife, perhaps. If you're answering, then no, not sure. Okay. Anyone? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So the 3 most important teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are Name Ruchi, Vaishnav Seva, and Jeev Daya. Name Ruchi means cultivating a taste for the holy name. Vaishnav Seva means humbly serving the Guru and the Vaishnavas, the sadhus. And third is Jiva Daya, means to share Krishna consciousness with others. So these are our positive sadhana. So our emphasis is on the positive sadhana. Varnashram aspect is a supporting thing so that we can peacefully do our sadhana. That's the key point. If we don't align our work and family and other things in a proper Varnashram way based on our psychophysical nature, the consequence of that is mentally, physically, emotionally will always be disturbed. And if we are disturbed, we cannot peacefully execute Krishna consciousness. That's what it is at the core. But the objective is not simply execution of duties. The objective is to ultimately do Haritoshnam pleasing. And the ultimate thing which pleases the Lord is the performance of Sanatan Dharma duties, which is Name Ruchi, Jeev Daya, Vaishnav Seva. So we should focus on that primarily. And then take care of our other material duties in the best way we can. Okay, I hope that gives some insight. Any other point, comment?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, can I just make another point, Prabhu? Because you were what we were sharing earlier that perfect happiness, it comes back to your consciousness. That means it is not so important where you are and all these things, which is very, very external. But at times, I mean, in our life, external environment does play an important and what key factors in kind of determining our kind of consciousness and so on. So I guess at the end of the day, we have to strike a balance between these external factors and also our consciousness. Am I right?
No, I didn't actually mean it that way. What I
Okay,
said was, I didn't say external consciousness, external situation doesn't matter. What it means, it doesn't matter for whom. It doesn't matter for a person who's in perfected consciousness. Narayana para sarve kutaschanana bibhyati. Sarga apavarga narkeshu api tulyartha darshina. For whom it doesn't matter at all. For a person of perfected consciousness. So are we of perfected consciousness? No. If we are not, it's going to make a difference to us. And that is why we have to evolve ourselves towards perfected consciousness. Once we come to the point of perfected consciousness, then it will no longer matter.
Okay, Prabhu, thanks.
Correct? Yeah. So, yeah, Narayana Para. So we are not Narayana Para yet. That's why we are affected. And that's why for us, at our state, if we are right now put into hell, we will not be able to remember the Lord. We may not be able to remember. We may totally forget also. We may even start cursing Krishna by saying, oh, you did, I did so much devotion for you, but this is what you did to me. You put me in hell. Chitraketu Maharaj did not respond like that because he was of perfected consciousness. So the point is that when we are in an imperfect state of consciousness, we will not be able to maintain that perfect consciousness, obviously, right? At wherever we are, we'll be affected by the external situation. And that's exactly what we are saying, that we want to attain a consciousness that it no longer matters where we are. So rather than going to a place, the more important thing is to attain that consciousness. That was the point. Because one can be in hell and in perfect consciousness, or one can be in heaven and be absolutely miserable. Because ultimately, all experience of joy and sorrow and misery are all matters of how the consciousness perceives the experience. Yeah. Okay. I hope that clarifies.
Yes, Prabhu, thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So I will see you all on Wednesday and we'll continue our discussion. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Prithu Maharaj and Archi Devi ki jai, Samaveda Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hari Om Tat Sat.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you.